Hello, and welcome back to my channel. Or if you're new here, welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a video form of a blog post, which I have scheduled for the 6th of February. It's something I'm really surprised I'm having to blog and do a video about because I, genuinely didn't realize this had happened. And it's called, I got a bizarre defamatory 1-star review, and it's for this book, which I did a video about, I think like maybe September, October-ish of 2021, and Aleksey Lived, an alternative history, which came out on July 17th, 2018, which was the 100th anniversary of the murder of Russia's final imperial family, obviously Alexei Nikolaevich, the Tsarevich among them. And this is, like one of the projects of my heart, one of the projects which is, like closest to me. I got the idea all the way back in, like, I think 1995, like 1996. That was when I started writing the original Hot Mess first draft. And so anyway, obviously don't really have a problem. Obviously, like personally, it kind of stings to get a 1 or 2-star review, but you have to kind of look past that and realize, oh, my book didn't click with everybody. Maybe that's just not the target audience. But this person went way beyond just saying, oh, I didn't like the book or didn't click with it, or I didn't like the direction she's doing, like personally attacking me and even making some defamatory statements and like constantly assigning all these absolutely bizarre motivations to me, like, oh, that's a feminist thing, and oh, you did this for feminist reasons. Like the word feminist and feminism, not even the word women's rights, that doesn't appear at all in the entire book. I have no idea what she was talking about. Like, she's just so offended by the idea that I would have like female characters who are like politically progressive and educated and say like women should be more than wives and mothers or whatever, just having women who aren't all just wives and mothers. So anyway, let's just get down with it. I've only had a handful of reviews for my dozen books published to date, since I'm terrible at marketing and self-promotion, but I really do hope to start stepping up my skills in the near future. So imagine my shock to see a 1-star review of And Aleksey Lived at Goodreads recently. This reviewer didn't just fail to click with my story, she went on a long, rambling, vitriolic rant about it with 0 paragraph breaks. It looked like it was several thousand words long, including several updates she made while reading and several personal attacks. She assigned all these bizarre motivations to me and even called me a shameless murder apologist. I totally understand that not everyone will like all of our characters or books. Some people in my writing groups, both back home in Albany and the place where I am now, unfortunately, that was disbanded because of COVID. But anyway, they have really been rubbed the wrong way by Feisty Cinnamon, one of my favorite absolute characters I've ever created in my lifetime. But everyone else who's ever met her over the years in a bunch of different like writing groups and blog posts and such, they've loved her and they thought she's an awesome character. So basically, yeah, it hurts to say, oh, I really don't like this character. I want something really bad to happen to her. But like when everyone else says, oh, she's really awesome. I love how, feisty she is, and I totally understand why she's, like acting maybe a little spoiled or like, just like kind of uppity or whatever when she's young, or not acting all sugar and spice. So like I have to listen to the majority instead of like minority who just like Cinnamon just isn't the character for them. But anyway, there's a huge difference between not being a book's target audience and going on a rant that's thousands of words long, where you constantly speak for the author's beliefs and motivations. That's just like totally chutzpahdik. This person has only reviewed a few books at Goodreads, and they're all Romanov books, which she also hates, that quail surprise. God forbid anyone imagine a radically different alternative historical scenario than they would. If it angers them so much, they should write their own books. And she even admits she really doesn't like alternative history to begin with, particularly about the Romanovs. So like, why did you even bother like reading any books about them that are like alternative historical? Just say, oh, this really isn't my thing. Or like when you realize fairly early on, oh, this really isn't the story for me. I'm not clicking with it at all. It's not a writing style I particularly like. Just, DNF it, be honest with yourself instead of like torturing yourself so you can write a thousands of word long personal attack on the author. Mine is the 3rd book she has read that matches Aleksey with an older woman, which just makes her apoplectic. Is it that unthinkable that a grown man would fall in love with an older woman? And he's 25, by the way, when he falls in love with her, and there's no like grooming or anything. It's a totally unexpected love for both of them, and they just start out thinking, oh, we'll just be friends, or he thinking, oh, I want to marry this woman like in a convenience marriage for like, obviously, well, you can read the book to see all the different reasons and explanations and such, but it's not like, this is like a typical hookup or something. It's just like completely unexpected for both of them, and they're like both like well into adulthood when it happens, so it's not like she's like putting all these weird motivations on it. I had absolutely 0 political or feminist motivations for making Arcadia 7 years older and morganatic. I explicitly explained my reasons in the story behind the story, and she's constantly saying, "Oh, that's a feminist thing," or "Oh, I can tell the author is a feminist. Oh, look at that feminist thing. Oh, it's an educated woman who's politically progressive, and oh, I know you're a liberal." Like, where are you getting this from? Yeah, I will not deny I personally, in my like off the pages, I'm like an old school leftist slash socialist, and I'm a second wave radical feminist. In this context, the word radical means root, like we want to get to the root of women's oppression. It doesn't mean extremist, which was a misconception I had for many years. But anyway, she's like, I don't know, like what was motivating her. She's basically projecting her own like conservative anti-feminist beliefs into the story. It's like anything that even remotely hints of being like a little bit like to the left on the political spectrum, or saying like, oh, a woman can be more than just like a stay-at-home wife and mother, like doing more with her life than just like basically, like sitting around doing artwork and embroidery all day, like being active in like politics or getting like a master's degree. Oh, that's just like totally suspect, and I know why the author did that. Like seriously, the words feminist and feminism don't appear at all in the book, and not even the term women's rights appear. So like seriously, where is she getting this from? This person didn't understand why I couldn't marry him to an equally ranked princess close to his own age, like Princess Astrid of Sweden. If you love that match so much, you can write a story where it happens. Writers have the right to choose which the direction they take their own stories. And, it's like someone saying to an artist, for example, the painting, really not my style. I hate it. I would have put the tree on the left side, and I like would have made the fish blue instead of red. So that's awesome. You make a painting like that, but you're not addressing the painting that actually exists. I mean, that artist or the writer makes those choices for a reason. Like, just it's like so chutzpahdik to say, oh, I don't like the way you took the story, and just because I wouldn't have done it that way, therefore it's completely wrong. That's just freaking ridiculous. And I wanted one major fictional character instead of only working with real life people. That also kind of really made it easier for me to let go, because when you're working with real life people, you can only like take them so far outside of what they were really like. Absolutely bizarre how this reviewer thinks, and she keeps hammering on about it, that Arcadia is unrealistically perfect in a self-insert. Like, what? And that Aleksey only changes his mind about avoiding marriage because of a trope. And this is an apparent trope, I guess. I had never heard of this, and it has a really like a vulgar term. I'm not going to use it because I don't really like using language like that. But I'm just thinking, WTF? Like, where are you getting all this from? Are you like completely like not understanding? Like, oh, a love story, that's kind of a normal thing in most books. Like, would I not have a love story in this book, just have him be like a sad bachelor all his life because, oh, he's trying to be a noble martyr by not marrying and having children because he's afraid like I'll die young and leave a grieving widow and very young half orphaned children. Like, she acts like, oh, it's so unthinkable to have a love story in a book, and oh, he couldn't fall in love with anyone. And this woman who is like wonderful, like good characteristics that are just absolutely perfect for him and perfect for being the empress consort the Russian Empire needs to finally enter the 20th century and like do a constitutional monarchy and stuff. Oh, that's just horrible. Like, so in her opinion, what should I have done? Like, for example, made Arcadia like ugly, uneducated, like only like getting an education to the 5th grade or something, like an ignorant peasant bumpkin, like totally unfashionable, rude to people, alienating Aleksey's entire family, like an argumentative, hen-picking wife, an abusive mother. Like, so what? Like, just because she has good characteristics that are necessary for the role she's intended for in the book, and for like falling in love with Aleksey and being like just the absolutely perfect partner he needs, both in his like personal life and for guiding the empire. Like, I'm just really confused. Like, why should I have created like a terrible character for his love match, the great love of his life? That's just so weird. And so anyway, I'm just gonna read a bit from my the story behind the story in the book, which I like explain many things in the different appendices throughout the book and obviously on my blog post. But this is a little bit particularly about like his choice of a wife. I realized it made more sense for him to seek a native-born Russian wife from a non-reigning house, or a morganatic princess, after being forced to take a wife, which is something he's like resisting for a long time. The above-mentioned reasons, he's like scared about his hemophilia being passed on, or like leaving a grieving widow and half orphans. The common people wouldn't have wanted yet another foreign princess, let alone a German, so soon after World War I. Making Arcadia 7 years older instead of keeping her 2 years younger, which the Tsaritsa in the original like hot mess first draft was 2 years younger. Her name was also Varvara. I obviously changed the first name as well, but I kept Varvara as the baptismal name. And so keeping her 7 years older instead, making her 7 years older instead of keeping her 2 years younger was also just what Aleksey needed. It makes the fantasy like fairy tale Arcadia steps into even more unconventional and distinctive, which, is kind of my whole purpose in that as well, and underlies what an unusual sovereign Aleksey is, unafraid to be different from the others. And as well, many people have observed this, like many times, like a young man, that an older woman is just what he needs to get his head screwed on straight. She brings more like worldly life experience to the partnership, and she like maybe helps him grow up a little. Obviously, I'm not talking about like huge age differences or like a guy who's like too young, like 18 or 20, but just maybe like in his mid to upper 20s and such. Like the older woman is absolutely perfect, and she like calms him down, helps him get settled, like makes him get more mature and sophisticated and stuff. And that's basically a lot of what I was thinking. Like the fact that I like younger men myself, that didn't, well, I mean, it played a little bit of a role, because I do like switching it up from the expectation, oh, the man always has to be older in the romantic relationship, or like maybe they just in like the same grade level at school. Yeah, that did have a little bit to do with it, but again, that wasn't my like primary reason at all. It was just, as I explained, like just so many different like reasons I chose to do that. And so it's just bizarre. She's like singling that, like, oh, she's too perfect, and like acting like she's like a Nancy Drew level of a Mary Sue, like, oh, she can fly an airplane at 14, and she's got 10 PhDs out the age of 16, and she can like do housework and have the house sparkling clean within 20 minutes, and everyone loves her the moment they meet her. And she's just like doing like diplomatic work and like being in a student president and like doing in 10 sports teams and all. So like where are you like getting all of this stuff from? The reviewer takes issue with how Aleksey doesn't like his sisters and grandmother still calling him Sunbeam and Baby, even into adulthood. He never lashes out at them in rage when he asks not to be called by his baby nicknames. It's hardly unusual for people to reject a childish nickname as they get older. Like, for example, like a guy wants to start going by Joe once he graduates elementary school or junior high or whatever. Like he kind of feels like babied when everyone keeps calling him Joey. Like, I mean, maybe like you'll let your great grandmother, who can't really like learn new ways, keep calling you by like a more childish nickname. But like many people, that's kind of like normal. Like, don't call me babykins anymore. Like, I don't want to be called like Johnny. I want to be called John now that I'm starting to get older. My friends will make fun of me, and I feel like you're not taking me seriously as a grown up or someone who's like becoming a teenager. So like, what is the big deal with that? She acts like it's like totally completely out of the question. And since when are Aleksey and his sisters in my book ever disrespectful of their late parents? They say multiple times that they'll always love and miss their parents, despite coming to realize what a mess they made of the Russian Empire and how it wasn't healthy to be kept so cloistered and babied their entire lives. I also stand by my decision to keep Nicholas and Alexandra murdered. That was what the story needed. And if you ask like pretty much anyone in touch with reality, they will say that it really was not healthy for these children. Like even the oldest of them, who were in their early 20s at the time they were murdered, they were still talking and acting and thinking like little girls, and that because like they were basically just in the gilded cage with their family all the time. They didn't interact with many people, like even in their own extended family. They like barely had any friends at all outside of that like tightly cloistered network, and so it's just not healthy for them. And so when they're orphaned in the book and they come under the guardianship of their uncle Grand Duke Mikhail Alexandrovich and his wife Natalia, they're like, and they have to basically start interacting a lot more with people like outside of the immediate family, and they finally have the chance to go outside into the world, like beyond the confines of like mommy dearest. They're realizing, oh, these people like who are my own age or like around my age, they're like much different than I am, and I feel like I'm so stunted compared to them, and I have to do all this like catching up at lightning speed so they'll take me seriously and like realize, oh, I'm not some like 20-year-old who's like mentally 13 or whatever. And so I do really believe they may have like come to that realization in real life as well. And so again, that's not disrespectful at all. Many times you can say, oh, I absolutely love my parents or grandparents or like a teacher or whoever, but I at the same time I do recognize they did some things that were just like not mentally or physically healthy for me. That doesn't like mean the love doesn't exist at all or the respect. It just means like, oh, I'm being honest and realistic. This just wasn't good for me, and just like that. She thinks my dialogue is childish, like what? And that there's no character development, and that there's too much telling. Odd how everyone who read excerpts on my blog over all the years I wrote this book, and the people in my writing group back in Albany, had the exact opposite reaction. I'm not some 12-year-old writing fan fiction. Like, she claims like I'm just like dumping everything I know about the Romanovs and Aleksey's childhood on the page and dialogue. Like, please give me some specific examples. Like she says, like, oh, Aleksey is constantly telling his detailed life story all about his hemophilia to people he meets. Like, please again give examples. Like he might like talk about that when it's relevant to someone who doesn't know, but it's not like, yo, oh, I'm having a nice conversation with someone at a bookstore, like having dinner with someone, and all of a sudden, like, oh, by the way, did you know about this blow by blow detailed account of my entire life? Like, seriously, and many people, I genuinely don't understand what some people like define telling versus showing as. Like, for me, telling is like a dull summary of events, like in The Invisible Bridge by Julie Oranger, which I may do a video form of my blog post at some point in the future. It's basically just, this happened, then that happened, name did this, name said that, over the summer, these things happened. These things happen in the winter. Stilted info-dumpy dialogue. Flashback with even more telling. Telly, lots of telling. And so it's sometimes you do need to tell things because it just moves the action along faster. And because if you like basically show every single thing, it'll make the book like bloat up even longer, particularly when it's like already has a big ensemble cast and like spans many years. So you basically can't like show everything. Sometimes you just have to tell to like speed it along, or sometimes it just like serves the purpose of a scene better. Like you have to see, oh, what is the actual, like purpose, the point, or the theme of this like particular chapter or scene or part of the book, or do I really need to like show everything that happened during this time period, or can I just like skip ahead a few times and only focus on the most important core episodes? Like seriously, like, and I have worked really hard to kind of subdue, like not completely subdue, but just like get more with a modern program, like old-fashioned writing style and voice, so I don't sound like so completely out of touch. So that's like a really surprising like observation to me, that someone would think I'm doing way more like telling than showing, because after how hard I've worked to like seem like a more modern person. I've always been extremely honest about how emotionally difficult it was to write this book, because I couldn't stop thinking about how Aleksey and his sisters and their uncle were murdered in real life, never had these happy endings. That necessarily gave some of it a more distant point of view, and my old-fashioned writing style was more pronounced. And like I do feel like if I hadn't been like so much in my own head and like just so emotionally distraught, particularly in part one, which is like takes place right after they really were murdered in real life, I might have been able to write it completely differently, or perhaps I could have put it out in like several different volumes of the same book instead of just one book. Or like maybe I probably won't do this, but like I have considered like in passing, like maybe like putting out separate books, like fleshing out part one and part two in particular into like much longer books, so I could have like more detailed episodes instead of like a lot of like wrap around, or like skipping like fairly large chunks of time, or again like doing some telling instead of showing where I felt it was necessary. But again, that's just the the way that this book came together. And so like sometimes when you're in your own head, that's you can't really like write as fully and freely. And I do admit like deep point of view isn't really something I do a lot of. It doesn't come naturally to me. And as I mentioned in a much previous video about my first published book, and Jakob flew the fiend away, like I really was trying to, because I was hoping for traditional publication at that time, and also thinking like mature upper YA, like I have to do things in a certain different writing style than I usually do. So I was like doing all this like description of like emotional like body language and stuff, and when I was doing that, and when I read back on it, sometimes it just like feels like really forced and fake, like I was trying to write like someone I was not. That's just not how I naturally write at all. And so we have to obviously be cognizant of what we need to do in the modern era for writing style, but we also shouldn't like completely give up our natural established style because I just happen to write in a more old-fashioned way. And yes, some people might think that's more like emotionally distanced, or like too much telling instead of showing, but sometimes that just naturally works with a particular kind of story, and the writers always make these decisions for a reason. She thinks it's inexcusable how Aleksey lets his uncle and regent, Grand Duke Mikhail, continue his pogroms and martial law, resulting in thousands upon thousands of deaths and untold suffering, instead of taking power and ending all, particularly when Aleksey is really emotionally torn up about it, and like seeing all these like refugees streaming into Paris and doing like a lot of like humanitarian like charity work behind the scenes so he can like help them and basically like learn about like just like the historical forces like causing all this stuff. But the core conflict of part two is Aleksey feeling insecure about his inexperience and wanting to learn these skills by studying at the Sorbonne, living independently in Paris, and having an apprenticeship to the throne with Mikhail when he returns home. Without that, there's no compelling storyline. Like, tell me what I would have done differently, or maybe if I had just like done a happy ending. Oh, he immediately comes to the throne as soon as he's of age, and none of this bad stuff happens. Like, there would have been no plot. It would have been kind of like boring and episodic. So I honestly like, don't understand what she was like hoping to get out of this story. And of course, Aleksey's sisters don't rush to hug him when he's confessing his irrational grudge against them when for not comforting him when they were in front of the firing squad. This is like when they're have basically moved into the basement of the Alexander Palace during World War II, during what was the siege of Leningrad in real life, but because the city doesn't change its name in the book, it's the siege of St. Petersburg. And so they're basically like the entire household, like the extended family. Some of them have moved in for safety and numbers, and like the whole entourage of servants and like the animals in the farm outside, and Aleksey's doctors and the palace priests. They're basically just like all down there, and like he's like doing his like confession because he's like not on his deathbed, but he's like been very, very ill with an injury for a long time. And so like if he's lying in bed with a serious injury and can't exactly move around at ease, like why would someone like go like hug and comfort him? Like really look at the context of that, like seriously. And speaking of the firing squad in captivity, that changed the 5 of them forever. They couldn't just go back to their old lives as though nothing happened. Since Aleksey was only 13, his brain was much more malleable and open to a radically different way of doing things. And like that's made it pretty clear throughout the entire book. Like their like minds are like totally like traumatized. Like that would traumatize like everybody. Like you're in front of a firing squad, you saw your parents murdered in front of you, people were shooting at you very almost could have like died. Obviously they were murdered in real life. Like if the white soldiers hadn't come down there at that moment, they would have been died. And then they like saw their parents assassin hanged, like when they were like brought to trial and such. So basically like how are you going to like, oh, let's just get back to things how they were in 1917, like nothing ever happened? Like seriously, like, and particularly when you're 13, like, oh, you're much more open to different ways. No, I want to do things so much more differently when I'm on the throne because I don't want this to happen again. And he had also become very sensitive and compassionate because of his lifetime of suffering. And there are even exact quotes from him like saying like, when I'm czar, there shall be no one hungry or sad or poor. I want everyone to be happy. And like he's like saying again in his diary when he's like 12 or 13, like when I'm czar, like I will make things right in this country. Like I'm just like so like disgusted and like sad and unhappy and stuff about what happened. So again, like think of this in context. I'm pretty much like making this clear throughout the entire book. Like I just genuinely don't understand. She has some kind of like grudge, or she's like just not like listening. And I also chose not to feature Aleksey's sisters very heavily once they're married because the story isn't about them and they're already so overrepresented in Romanov fiction. Like seriously, if you claim to have read all these books about the Romanovs, like wouldn't you know that? Like wouldn't you think it's a breath of fresh air? Like, oh, finally a book about Aleksey instead of yet another book about the sisters, particularly Anastasia. Like the world does not need yet another Anastasia book. Sorry, not sorry. By far the worst part of her review is that she thinks I'm an evil, shameless murder apologist who believes murder is okay as long as you're a leftist. When the hell did I ever even remotely imply such a vile thing? Just because some of the leading Bolsheviks are genuinely rehabilitated in prison, pardoned, and given high-ranking positions in Aleksey's new government where they, prove they really, really have changed and they put their talents to good use instead of like evil and like trying to overthrow the government again. Like, redemption and forgiveness is a thing, and it's like, again, made clear throughout the book. He wants to understand what motivated them and made them tick, like, oh, maybe they didn't start out evil. They had like, legitimate complaints and they wanted to change things for the better. And so he's like gonna like read about like psychology and Russian history from all sides. And so he realizes his uncle's last will and testament wants these guys to be hanged. And so instead he has them brought to the palace under armed guard, like talks to them about their politics, their views and such, and invites them to be in the government. And over time they prove they, really, really are capable and they're good secondary characters. And this like reviewer is just so angry about this. Like, where the F did I say I'm okay with murder as long as you're a leftist? I don't even explicitly state my own like old-fashioned like leftist like socialist views in the book. Obviously, like many of my characters are, like left-wing because that's what I am. But I mean, I have some conservative characters, but it's just like I'm not going around like making like these blatant statements about my own politics or like only having leftist characters because I'm a leftist, they're having them spout out the same views I do. And I have never, ever, ever said I think murder is okay if you're a leftist, or like whatever your politics are, that I'm like evil, shameless murder apologist. That is like complete defamation. And yes, I have like reported that view, that review on Goodreads, as well as also flagging it. And like, I really, really hope they can take that down, because that's more than just like giving a 1-star review to a book you just didn't click with. That's making defamatory statements about an author, and that's like just, completely unacceptable. And also, Stalin is never released, like both in the original first draft and the completed project, since he is mentally unwell and too much of a security risk. And Sigmund Freud comes to give him psychoanalysis off the pages, but it doesn't really work. Like, he's just like way too dangerous to go back into society, like either like in the government or just like as a dude at large. There would have been no interesting story if Nicholas and Alexandra had been rescued as well, which was my original vision in the first draft all those years ago. And Alexei had continued with the 18th century reactionary, arch-conservative policies and rigid house laws that caused so much trouble before. Like, seriously, I do believe even if the monarchy had been restored in real life or had never been overthrown, there would have been some necessary changes as they, started coming more and more into the 20th century and realized, oh, we can't really keep doing this. These house laws are like dwindling the marriage pool, and like all these people are like breaking the house laws to marry people who aren't like 100% like equally ranked, and like other like so-called disqualifying things. Like, maybe we need to be kinder and gentler, and like even people who are in our own family are objecting to the way we're ruling. Like, that's when a revolution is brewing, when the people who have the most invested in the status quo are like hammering, like you just like they want the guy or the woman in charge to be overthrown or start doing things radically differently. Like, seriously, like many of Nicholas's own relatives were like chomping at his heels and saying, dude, like, come into the 20th century already. You're acting like an 18th century, like, absolute monarch, autocrat. Like, dude, just stop it already. And like, I do believe Alexei would have ruled much, much differently than his father if he'd like been allowed to grow to manhood, like take the throne, or if even like if Nicholas had like abdicated properly. He abdicated illegally, by the way. It's for a whole other like video, but he should have like abdicated properly and like given Alexei regents who would have helped and guided him, and just like so many things like that. I just genuinely don't understand where her perspective is coming from. The entire book is also leading up to part 4, when Alexei saves 9 million Jews from the Nazis in the greatest act of his life. It would be just a generic World War II story otherwise, and she thinks that's like a unrealistic fantasy. But like, again, like throughout the entire book, I give like plausible reasons for everything. I develop it. There are like some objections and like reticence and stuff. It's not like, oh, I just want this to happen, and so bang, I wave a wand and it like magically happens. There's no difficulties at all, or there's like no black moment or like anything like standing in my way. She acts like it's just this like boom 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 fantasy fairy tale, and this kind of insulting, particularly considering all the time and effort I put into it. Like my story, my rules. And she basically seems to have this like underlying attitude, oh, just remove everything that gives dramatic tension and unique angle. Paint by numbers. Be episodic with no unifying structured arc or direction. I would have done it this way, so therefore you're wrong for doing it any other way. Anything even remotely hinting at a positive opinion of left-wing politics and feminism is deeply wrong and suspect. I knew that was coming. Oh yeah, I knew you did that for a feminist reason, even when like I literally didn't, despite being a feminist myself. That just like wasn't a real factor at all in why I made like decisions, particularly about Arcadia. It's a fairy tale fantasy. Well, yeah, it kind of is, but it's not like a completely unrealistic thing. It's kind of meant to be like, oh, if Alexei had grown up, he would have become the greatest czar in history. That's like kind of the overriding theme. And yes, Arcadia is the perfect empress. She's not meant to be like a completely like unflawed human being. And like, oh, by the way, like all these people still like idealize Princess Diana, the people's princess. Like, oh, she could do no wrong. Like, how dare anyone criticize her for any little thing? So like, do you have something against like people having a fairy tale? Like, oh, this wonderful princess or queen or empress, she had so many wonderful qualities. Yeah, maybe she like wasn't like perfect, but we're just not gonna focus on that because like everything else about her we just absolutely love it. Like, are you like that like cynical or projecting your own like biases onto anything else you read? Oh, and it's wrong if it's not how I imagine it. Like, oh, and so like seriously. And I should also add, like, regardless of if you're doing like historical fiction with real characters or alternative historical, just like completely made up your own fictional characters, if you have an ensemble cast in a long timeline, like say like, 10, 15, 20 years, whatever, they require prioritization of characters, events, active versus passive scenes, when to skip ahead, and do wraparound narrative. So you basically can't like detail like every single day or week or month or even year or whatever. Sometimes you just have to choose. And again, like particularly with the sisters, yeah, of course they're going to be off leading their own lives with their own families. Did she want me to like constantly have them like eating dinner and like lunch together and like hanging out on the weekends? They're entirely in entirely different spheres, particularly because like Aleksey is male and his sisters are female. So like particularly in those days, they wouldn't have been like together all the time. Like they had more like, womanly concerns, like more friends with women, and they were like with their children and husbands, while Aleksey is doing all the like political stuff and studying in Paris. So again, like how would you have had them constantly interacting in a way that worked for the story and just like felt right? And again, like writers make decisions for like reasons, like they make sense in the context of the story, and they like basically feed into like character development and every little different like aspects of like the chapters and parts in the whole story. It's like, and if we like frog the storyline, like frogging is like when you like take out all the stitches of sewing and then basically put it back together, like what would we put it back together with that would still have it be the same story? Like, oh, I don't like this character doing this because I think it's immoral to have a real life character who we know like 99% nothing about like doing this, so therefore you should like assume he was a good guy in real life and nothing bad, and just have something really really boring and milk toast. And that basically takes out all the dramatic tension of having that happen. That's obviously a subject for a different thing. I'm thinking about a criticism someone had of something in my alternative history about Dante and Beatrice. But again, like writers make our decisions for a reason. And this reviewer also seems to like overstate a lot of these so-called flaws and decontextualizes them, like with the like claiming the like dialogue is unrealistic and childish. Again, please give me some like actual examples of this. And she's like talking like, oh, Aleksey is constantly like breaking out into his entire life story, and like everyone's doing, as you know, Bob dialogue, or like talking like little kids. Like that's completely false, particularly considering how long I, worked to have them act like the people they were in real life, and just to get less emotional. Obviously, it was always an emotional project the entire time, but just to get a little bit out of my head so completely. And I really base these real life people on the how they were. It's not like I was just like, oh, they're just names on a page. That's insulting, particularly considering how horrible the original. Oh, actually, I did two first drafts. Technically, the one in like 95, 96, and then the one I did a little bit on in 2001. And like, so that has come so far. And she's acting like, oh, this is just like childish derivative fan fiction crap, instead of the like the process of like just like working and developing it. Well, over so many years, I worked, so hard on this, and it's kind of insulting to be told it's, oh, just like the way someone would write it at 10 years old. And this also sounds like this person kind of is a Romanov fangirl. And as I mentioned in my previous video about the Romanovs, like Romanov fangirls, they're kind of, they're not kind of, they really are creepy many times. Like they have this like a personal emotional investment, like talking like their best friend, using nicknames that grand duchesses are never known to have gone by in real life, like calling Tatiana Tatya or calling Olga Olishka, or just like seriously like talking like they're best friends instead of like historical figures from like long ago whom they never met. And like they're like, oh no, I would have done it this way. You should stick to exactly how they lived in 1917 and assume like nothing would have changed at all in their life. So again, I really think Romanov fangirls are creepy, but hopefully they'll grow out of this once they're out of their teenage years. I've just encountered a lot of like really weird Romanov fangirls on Instagram, and I say fangirls instead of fanboys because they're like exclusively female in my experience. Thank you very much for watching. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing. I do enjoy seeing comments from you guys. Like, let me know if you're a writer and you've ever received a 1-star review that went way beyond just like disagreeing with the writing or whatever, but like personally attacking you, or like assigning all these like weird bizarre motivations for you, and like claiming they know why you really did something or what your personality is really like. That's like really like surprising to see, and I'd like to know if any of you guys have ever had that experience. Like, if you haven't read it, I really would like to encourage you to read the book. Like maybe you'll have a better opinion of it, and you can like leave positive reviews in it, because indie authors, we really really do depend on people reviewing our books. When people see like books without reviews, they're less likely to take a chance on it, particularly when they don't know who that author is. And I spent like several, well, more than several years, like in total from the time I envisioned it to the finished product. But I did spend a really 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 long time like writing and researching this book and editing and polishing and stuff. So one of the things I'm proudest of having written. So I really really would appreciate if more people would like read this book and start reviewing it. But you know, obviously, no pressure. You can like read it anytime you like. It's not going anywhere. And I'll obviously hit the notification bell so you can be notified when I upload new videos. And thanks again for watching. I will see you guys again very soon. Bye.